In the heart of Europe, there once stood a wall. Not a border. Not a defensive line. A wall built straight through streets, homes, and families. On one side, it was called protection. On the other, it was called a prison. The same concrete. The same wall. But if a wall is built to protect people, why were so many willing to risk their lives trying to cross it? This is the story of the Berlin Wall, and why it was seen as both protection and imprisonment. Berlin after World War II. To understand why a wall would eventually rise between East and West Berlin, we need to go back to Germany after World War II. When the war ended in 1945, Germany had not only lost a conflict, it had lost control over its own future. The country lay in ruins, cities were flattened, millions were gone, and millions more were left without homes. The Nazi government collapsed completely, leaving behind a power vacuum. Germany now resembled a pizza sliced up by the victorious powers. The United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union each took control of an occupation zone. Officially, this division was meant to be temporary. Germany would be rebuilt, stabilized, and eventually reunited. But almost immediately, one thing became clear: the former allies no longer trusted one another. Nowhere was this tension more visible than in Berlin. Berlin was Germany's capital, but geographically, it lay deep inside the Soviet-controlled zone. Yet the city itself was divided into 4 sectors, each administered by one of the occupying powers. What looked practical on paper quickly turned Berlin into a political time bomb. In the western sectors, controlled by the United States, Britain, and France, life began to change. Democratic institutions were established, independent media returned. Economic aid from the Marshall Plan helped rebuild businesses and infrastructure. In the East, under Soviet control, an entirely different system took shape. Private industries were nationalized, political opposition was eliminated, media and education were placed under strict state control. The goal was not individual freedom, but ideological loyalty. East Germany, officially founded in 1949, was built as a socialist state closely aligned with the Soviet Union. 2 German states now existed side by side, the Federal Republic of Germany in the west, and the German Democratic Republic in the east, and Berlin stood between them. What made Berlin especially dangerous was that, in its early years, the city remained relatively open. There were no physical barriers separating East and West Berlin. People could move freely between the 2 sides, sometimes every day. Someone could live in East Berlin, work in West Berlin, and return home in the evening. This openness produced an unintended consequence. Berlin became a living comparison between 2 systems. On one side of the city, shops were full, incomes rose, political debate, though imperfect, was allowed. On the other side, shortages became common, movement was restricted, dissent came at a heavy cost. For many East Germans, the choice was no longer ideological, it was practical. If life was better on the other side of the city, why stay? Between 1949 and 1961, more than 2.5 million people left East Germany for the West. Most of them passed through Berlin. They were not criminals or enemies of the state. They were doctors, engineers, teachers, students, the very people needed to keep a society functioning. For the East German government, this was not just a migration issue. It was an existential crisis. Every departure was a silent rejection of the system. Each one weakened the economy, embarrassed the state, and threatened the legitimacy of socialist rule. Meanwhile, the Cold War was escalating. The United States and the Soviet Union were no longer simply former allies. They became global rivals, each convinced the other posed a direct threat to its way of life. Berlin became the clearest front line of this conflict, not because of tanks or missiles, but because of people. By the late 1950s, the situation was no longer sustainable. East German leaders faced a choice: reform the system, or stop the flow of people leaving. Reform meant risking the loss of control. Stopping people from leaving meant choosing a far more drastic solution. The solution they chose would change Berlin forever, and soon after, it would turn one city into a symbol recognized by the entire world. 2 ideologies that could not coexist. By the late 1950s, East Germany was facing a problem it could no longer ignore. Millions of citizens had left the country, factories lost skilled workers, hospitals lacked doctors, universities lost students before they could even graduate. The state invested years in educating its people, only to watch them leave. In theory, there were two solutions: reform the system, or stop people from leaving, but reform was not a simple option. East Germany was not just a country, it was a frontline state of the socialist world. Any meaningful reform risked weakening the ruling party's control, and more importantly, it could signal to the Soviet Union that authority was slipping. In a system built on ideological certainty, doubt was dangerous. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, West Berlin represented a threat greater than military force. It was comparison. West Berlin operated under a capitalist model, shaped by democratic institutions and a market economy. Individuals could choose their jobs, start businesses, criticize the government, and most importantly leave the country if they wished. Economic recovery in the West was not perfect, but it was unmistakable. Shops were full, incomes rose, foreign investment flowed in, cultural life revived. For many East Germans, West Berlin was not propaganda, it was something they could see with their own eyes. And that visible presence was the real problem. Because ideology survives best in isolation, when people cannot compare, they can be taught what to believe, but when comparison becomes part of daily life, belief turns into judgment, and Berlin allowed that comparison to exist. A person could work during the day in West Berlin, earn higher wages, see shelves full of goods, hear uncensored news, and return in the evening to East Berlin, where the state controlled information, movement, and opportunity. No propaganda campaign could compete with lived experience. From the East German government's perspective, this was not merely an economic or migration issue, it was a crisis of legitimacy. A state that claimed to represent the will of the people could not survive. If those very people consistently chose to leave, each departure was a silent question: if this system is better, why are we running away from it? The ideological conflict between East and West is often described as capitalism versus socialism. But at its core, it was a struggle between control and choice. In the West, the system accepted uncertainty, markets could fail, governments could be criticized, leaders could be replaced through elections. Instability was seen as the price of freedom, but also the source of adaptability. In the East, uncertainty was treated as a threat, stability required control. The state planned production, employment, education, and information. In theory, this eliminated inequality and chaos. In practice, it concentrated power. Dissent was not seen as an alternative viewpoint, it was seen as danger. This difference shaped how each side interpreted human behavior. When people left East Germany, the West saw it as a rational choice. When people left East Germany, the East saw it as betrayal, or as the result of manipulation by external enemies. The same action, with two completely opposite meanings. As the Cold War intensified, neither side could afford to appear weak. The United States and its allies viewed Berlin as proof that freedom was attractive, that people would choose it voluntarily. The Soviet Union viewed Berlin as a vulnerability, a hole in the ideological border of the socialist world. Allowing that opening to remain became increasingly unacceptable, but closing it carried enormous risk. Any drastic move in Berlin could trigger an international crisis. The city lay deep inside Soviet-controlled territory, yet it was politically, and symbolically, protected by the West. One mistake could push the conflict far beyond Germany's borders. For years, both sides hesitated, negotiations failed. The situation was frozen not because it was stable, but because no one knew how to change it without disaster. Meanwhile, the flow of people continued. By 1961, East German leaders concluded that time was not on their side. Each month, thousands more left. The longer the border remained open, the weaker the state became. Reform risked collapse from within. Doing nothing guaranteed collapse. The choice narrowed. If the two systems could not compete openly, then comparison itself had to be eliminated. That was the moment when ideology turned into architecture, not to persuade, not to attract, but to separate. What followed was not the beginning of the conflict, it was the physical expression of a conflict already decided. Two ideologies had coexisted within one city, Now, they could no longer share the same space, and from that realization, Berlin's fate was sealed. The night the wall was built, by the early 1960s, East Germany was no longer talking about reform, it was talking about survival. The flow of people leaving the country had become an uncontrollable hemorrhage. Every day, thousands continued to leave East Germany for the West, not through heavily guarded borders, but through Berlin, which remained open. Berlin became the largest escape route. For the East German leadership, this was no longer a public relations problem. It was a structural crisis. Walter Ulbricht, the leader of East Germany at the time, understood that if this continued, the state would collapse, not because of war, but because of the silent departure of its own citizens. But East Germany could not act alone. Berlin was not just a city, it was an international flashpoint. Any decision involving Berlin risked drawing in the United States, the Soviet Union, and the Western powers, so the solution had to be prepared in silence. For months, East German leaders held quiet discussions with the Soviet Union. They argued that leaving the Berlin border open posed a direct threat to the entire socialist bloc. If East Germany collapsed, a domino effect could spread across Eastern Europe. In the end, the Soviet Union agreed, not because it wanted a wall, but because it saw no other option. The plan was given an innocuous name, Operation Rose. That gentle title concealed one of the most shocking decisions of the 20th century. The objective was clear, to completely stop migration from east to west through Berlin, but execution had to be fast, and it had to be sudden. If people knew in advance, one final wave of escapes would erupt, larger than ever before, so there was no announcement, no referendum, no warning. On Saturday night, August 12, 1961, Berlin went to sleep like any other night. People still crossed freely between east and west, families made plans to meet the next morning. No one knew it would be the last time they walked those familiar streets. While the city slept, tens of thousands of East German soldiers, police officers, and construction workers quietly took their positions. In the early hours of August 13, 1961, the operation began. Barbed wire was stretched across the city. Roads were blocked, tram and railway lines were cut, armed guards stood at key intersections. Berlin was divided in a matter of hours. When the sun rose, people woke up in a completely different city. Streets that had once been crowded were now torn in two, neighbors could no longer visit one another. Those who lived in East Berlin but worked in the West were trapped or stranded forever on the other side. Families were split overnight. At first, what appeared was not a concrete wall, only barbed wire, wooden posts, and soldiers, but the message was unmistakable. Berlin was no longer an open city. In the weeks that followed, the temporary barriers were quickly replaced by something far more permanent. Concrete walls rose, watchtowers multiplied, a death strip was created between the two sides, a zone no one was allowed to enter. The Berlin Wall began to take shape. Officially, East German authorities declared it an anti-fascist protective barrier. They claimed the wall was meant to stop spies, sabotage, and to protect peace. But to those standing on the other side of the barbed wire, the explanation rang hollow. If the wall was built to protect the people, why were they not allowed to leave? In the early days, many believed the measures were temporary, that life would eventually return to normal. But as concrete was poured, that hope began to fade. Berlin was not only divided in space, it was divided in time. Future plans were erased. Meetings that would never happen. Children grew up without seeing their grandparents again, siblings became strangers, and then, the escape attempts began. Some jumped over the barbed wire in the early days, when the barriers were still crude. Some dug tunnels, some disguised themselves, some climbed out of windows of buildings that stood directly on the border. Not everyone succeeded. Over time, the wall became increasingly lethal. Border guards were ordered to shoot if necessary. Crossing the wall was no longer an act of escape, it became a gamble with one's life. Yet despite the danger, people kept trying, because for many, living without choice was more terrifying than death. The night of August 13, 1961 did not only change Berlin. It changed how the world saw the Cold War. For the first time, an ideology did not merely draw borders in people's minds, it built them with concrete, barbed wire, and guns. The Berlin Wall was not built to stop an invading army, it was built to stop its own citizens from leaving. and from that moment on, the question was no longer whether the wall was necessary, it became, what must a system be afraid of, to need a wall like this? Life on both sides of the wall. When the Berlin Wall was built, it did not merely divide a city, it divided the rhythms of life. In the East, life went on, at least on the surface, people still went to work, schools remained open, factories continued to operate. But every movement unfolded under the gaze of the state. The wall was not just a physical barrier, it was a constant reminder that freedom of movement had ended. Streets that once led to West Berlin now ended in concrete, barbed wire, and armed guards. Train stations that had once been crowded became meaningless dead ends. Some subway lines still ran beneath East Berlin, but they did not stop. They became known as ghost stations. Trains passed through in silence, under dim lights and the watch of gun barrels. East Berliners learned how to live with things left unsaid. Not everyone openly opposed the wall, not because they agreed with it, but because silence was safer. The state called the wall a protective barrier. The media repeated this every day. Schools taught children that the wall existed to preserve peace. But inside small apartments, behind closed doors, adults whispered different questions. Why does peace need to be protected with guns? In the West, life also changed, but in a different way. West Berlin became an island. Completely surrounded by East Germany, the city was no longer physically connected to West Germany. Every route in or out passed through Soviet-controlled territory. Every journey carried a sense of fragility, yet instead of collapsing, West Berlin became a symbol. The West poured money into the city. Culture, art, and music flourished. Cafes, cinemas, and concert halls became places where life and freedom were asserted. Right next to the wall, West Berlin did not merely live, it had to live, as a rebuttal. But behind the lights and performances, the sense of loss remained. West Berliners could see their loved ones on the other side, but could not reach them. Streets they once walked every day now lay only meters away. Separated by concrete, that small physical distance became an unbridgeable divide. The wall turned ordinary relationships into impossibilities. Siblings became foreigners. Elderly parents passed away without their children present. Meetings were postponed indefinitely, and then forgotten. Time began to move at two different speeds. In the East, the state steadily refined its system of control. The death strip was expanded. More watchtowers were built. Border guards were trained to shoot those who attempted to cross. Escape was no longer a personal act, it became a crime against the state. Fear did not need to be loud, it lived in habit. People learned not to ask too many questions. Not to look too long toward the West. Not to say things that could be misunderstood. The wall began to shape behavior, thought, and even the dreams of a generation. In the West, the wall also left psychological scars. People lived with the constant anxiety that a crisis could erupt at any moment. A small confrontation at a checkpoint could draw in the entire world. Berlin became the coldest front of the Cold War, and one of its most tense. Children grew up with the wall as part of the landscape. They drew it in pictures. They played in its shadow. For many of them, the wall was not something abnormal. It was simply the world they knew. That may have been the wall's greatest victory, not stopping people, but making division feel normal. Over the years, the wall was reinforced, upgraded, and perfected. From crude barbed wire, it evolved into a multi-layer defense system. High concrete walls, sand trenches, floodlights, guard dogs, and automatic weapons. Each new layer sent a clearer message: this division was not temporary. Yet no matter how thick the wall became, it could not erase one thing: comparison. East Berliners could still hear Western radio, still see the lights, still know that another life existed on the other side. And that knowledge was precisely why the wall had to grow higher and more dangerous. Because the wall was never built to keep Westerners out of East Germany. It was built to keep East Germans in. Both sides of the wall lived in different worlds, yet shared the same loss, the freedom to choose. And for nearly 3 decades that followed, life in Berlin would continue beneath the shadow of the wall, until one day, the very people once divided by it, would be the ones to bring it down. The East German perspective, protection. From the East German point of view, the Berlin Wall was not a symbol of oppression, it was a necessary measure, a defensive barrier, a form of protection. From the beginning, East German authorities did not call the structure a wall. Its official name was the Anti-Fascist Protective Barrier. This was not accidental. The name reflected how the state wanted its citizens to understand the world around them. In the East German narrative, the Cold War had never truly ended. Fascism did not disappear with the end of World War II, it merely changed form, and the West, especially West Germany, was portrayed as a place where old forces were resurfacing. According to official propaganda, West Berlin was not a free city, it was a capitalist outpost, a center of espionage, and a launching point for efforts to undermine socialism. From this perspective, Berlin was not simply a divided city, it was a security vulnerability. Throughout the 1950s, millions of East Germans left the country. The government did not call this migration. They called it brain drain, a silent attack on the economic and political foundations of the socialist state. Those who left were not described as victims, they were described as being lured. According to the state's argument, the West used money, propaganda, and false promises to entice East German citizens. Every doctor, engineer, or teacher who left was not merely an individual loss, it was the outcome of an invisible war, and in a war, defense is mandatory. From this logic, the wall was not built to imprison people, it was built to protect society from infiltration. East German media emphasized that the West had never accepted the existence of the socialist state. They claimed that West Germany still harbored ambitions of reunification at any cost, including through internal sabotage. If Berlin remained open, East Germany would exist in a constant state of instability. Without a clear boundary, there could be no real security. A country, they argued, could not survive if its borders existed only as an idea. From this viewpoint, the wall was a national border, even if it was not internationally recognized. Authorities also argued that the wall would stabilize everyday life. Once the outflow of people was stopped, the economy could be planned long-term, factories could operate reliably, schools could train a new generation without fear of losing their workforce. Stability, in their view, mattered more than individual freedom. In official speeches, East German leaders stressed that freedom could not exist if society itself was under threat. And to preserve peace, harsh decisions were sometimes necessary. The wall was presented as a temporary defensive measure. No one claimed it would exist forever. It was built to protect the achievements of socialism until the threat from the West disappeared. At the same time, the security system surrounding the wall continued to expand. Watchtowers were erected. The death strip was created, shoot-to-kill orders were issued. Each new layer of protection was explained as a response to hostile actions from the other side. Within the state's logic, without the wall, war was inevitable. This was the core of East Germany's argument. The wall was not the cause of tension, it was the solution to prevent that tension from escalating. Citizens were taught that they were sacrificing their freedom of movement in exchange for long-term peace, a difficult trade-off. But a necessary one, not an ideal choice, but the only choice. And for many people living in East Germany, especially those born after 1961, this narrative became normal. They never knew a Berlin before the wall. To them, the wall was not a political decision. It was simply reality. That is the power of the concept of protection. When a barrier exists long enough, it is no longer seen as a limit, it is seen as part of the order, and from the East German perspective, that order, however harsh, was still better than chaos. Western perspective, prison. From the other side of the wall, the story looked completely different. To the West, the Berlin Wall was not a defensive measure, it was a sign of fear, an admission of failure, and above all, a massive prison. No free nation needs to build walls to keep its own people inside. That was the core argument the West repeatedly emphasized. Normal borders are built to keep enemies out, not to shoot at one's own citizens, and the Berlin Wall did the opposite. From the very beginning, images of East German guards standing watch, their guns pointed inward toward the city, became a powerful symbol. No complex propaganda was required, just one simple question. If the wall was meant to protect the people, why were the guns aimed at them? In Western discourse, the flow of East Germans leaving the country was not seen as the result of an ideological war. They were individuals making personal choices, and when those choices were blocked by concrete and barbed wire, it was no longer politics, it was human rights. Freedom of movement was regarded as a fundamental right. Once that right was taken away, all other explanations became secondary. From this perspective, the wall did not create peace, it merely froze the conflict. The West argued that East Germany failed to solve its internal problems and instead chose to lock them in place. Rather than reform, it built barriers; rather than persuasion, it relied on coercion, and that very choice turned the wall into living proof of the difference between the two systems. In West Berlin, no one needed to be forced to stay, people were free to leave at any time, but they were not compelled to go, and they were not shot for remaining. The existence of choice itself was what mattered. The West emphasized that freedom only has meaning when there is the option to walk away. A truly successful system does not need walls to hold its people, it holds them through opportunity, through trust, and through voluntary participation. In that sense, the Berlin Wall was not a boundary between two nations, it was a boundary between two views of humanity. One believed people must be controlled for society to remain stable. The other believed people must be free for society to evolve. The West also saw what East Germany tried to conceal. The wall did not stop Westerners from entering, it stopped East Germans from escaping. That reality made every claim of defense increasingly difficult to sustain. Every attempt to cross the wall, whether successful or not, was used by the West as moral evidence. Stories of divided families, of people killed while trying to climb over, of gunshots in the night, all were told not to provoke war, but to underline a single point: no one risks their life to escape from paradise. The wall became the West's most powerful propaganda tool, not because they built it, but because they never had to explain it, they only had to let the world see it. Yet the West was not innocent either. They condemned the wall, but accepted its existence. No military action was taken to tear it down, because the cost could have been global war, and so the wall existed as a paradox. It was considered inhumane, yet tolerated. It was condemned, yet stood for decades. For the West, Berlin was where the Cold War became most visible. No missiles, no nuclear bombs, just a wall, enough to show that two worlds could not be reconciled. The wall turned freedom into something visible, and something that could be blocked, and while East Germany called it protection, the West called it by another name, a prison. The pain left behind. Every ideology speaks of the future, but its price is always paid in the present. When the Berlin Wall was built, the great debates continued: security, stability, sovereignty, peace. But for the millions of people living on both sides of the wall, those concepts felt distant. What they faced every day was loss. Families were the first to pay the price, overnight. Ordinary relationships became impossible. Siblings on opposite sides could no longer meet. Parents could not visit their children. Weddings took place with loved ones missing. Funerals passed in silence. There were no goodbyes, no promises of seeing each other again, only a distance of a few meters, and absolute helplessness. Many believed the separation would last only weeks or months. They kept the keys to relatives' homes. They left behind belongings, letters, memories. But as time passed, that belief slowly turned into fragile hope, and hope eventually turned into acceptance. A generation grew up having never known a Berlin without a wall. For them, grandparents on the other side were not close family, but names and stories. Those who tried to cross the wall paid with their lives. Parents could not visit their children. Many were simply young people, workers, students, ordinary individuals placed in extraordinary circumstances. They dug tunnels, they built hot air balloons, they climbed out of windows on ropes. And some fell just moments before reaching freedom. The gunshots did not only kill people, they killed the belief that the state exists to protect its citizens. Some bodies were left lying in the death strip, inaccessible. As a warning, death became a tool of deterrence, and fear became an unwritten law. But the dead were not the only victims. Those who stayed behind carried wounds as well. Surveillance seeped into everyday life. Friends no longer trusted one another. Neighbors could be informants. A careless remark could lead to interrogation. A dream of escape could destroy an entire family. Many people learned to censor their own thoughts. That was the invisible cost, and the most lasting one. In the West, the pain took a different form. People lived with a sense of moral helplessness. They saw the wall, they heard the stories. But they could not tear it down. The safety of the world was placed above the suffering of individuals, and each time someone died at the wall, the same question returned: if we know this is wrong, Why do we accept it? The wall did not only take away freedom, it eroded the very idea of responsibility. It allowed every side to hide behind political arguments, while human beings paid with their lives. The border guards did not stand outside that cost either. Many of them were very young. They stood watch with rifles in their hands and orders that could not be questioned. Some fired, and carried that memory for the rest of their lives. Some did not, and were punished for it. No one passed through this wall without being wounded. In hindsight, the Berlin Wall is often remembered as a symbol, but for those who lived with it, it was not a symbol, it was an experience. An experience of loss, fear, adaptation, and endurance, and it was ordinary people, not leaders or doctrines, who paid the price for a divided world, because the wall did not only divide two systems, it divided human beings from one another. The Berlin Wall eventually fell, but the questions it left behind did not. Some called the wall protection, others called it a prison, perhaps both were true, depending on where you stood. If a society needs walls, guns, and shoot-to-kill orders to survive, is it protecting its people, or protecting itself? And if freedom can threaten a system so deeply that it must be stopped, then what is truly dangerous? The Berlin Wall did not only divide a city, it forced the entire world to confront a question that has never had a clear answer: do people need to be protected from enemies, or from systems that fear they might leave?